Good morning all, and welcome back to day 2 of the current iteration of the Future of SOF Forum Series, dedicated to exploring the SOF identity. I am the Forum Director and host, Dr. Joseph Long, a faculty member here at JSOU. We continue day 2 with an exploration of the third and fourth lenses of the SOF identity. Yesterday, Drs. Wilson and Ellis guided us through the first lens of SOF utility, while myself and Dr. Tyne hosted discussion on SOF ethics. Today, we begin with Lens 3 of SOF's relationship with technology, and then conclude with Lens 4, diversity and inclusion. At the conclusion of the fourth panel, Dr. Rhinelander will moderate a brief discussion about the future of SOF through the capabilities of current information operations. Thank you all for taking the time to participate in this innovative discovery learning event. In our first panel of Lens 3, Dr. Grzegorzewski, one of our JSOU Senior Fellows, will lead a moderated discussion focused on exploring effective SOF technologies in the competition continuum. Dr. Grzegorzewski, please introduce your panelist as the floor is yours.
Hey, good morning. Thank you, Joe. This is Dr. Mark Grzegorzewski, and I'd like to welcome back everyone to day 2 of exploring the SOF identity. As a reminder, the conference is about exploring SOF identity through all lenses of the special operations professional perspective. That includes academics and other stakeholders. And we seek a diverse audience to engage in discourse on 4 main topics: SOF utility, ethics, emergent and disruptive technology, diversity, and inclusion. This morning, we're going to be talking about topic 3, which is SOF's relationship with technology. For this panel, this session 1, the topic is, in the context of SOF utility, what role does technology play in SOF? To discuss this, we have 3 esteemed panelists this morning. The first is Ms. Leslie Babich, who joined the SOFWERX team in Tampa in October 2020 and serves as the director at SOFWERX. Leslie provides operational and personal oversight while developing and implementing business plans that optimize results for its government partner, U.S. Special Operations Command. Second, we have Joe Mclaine, who is currently working with General Motors as part of the Global Vehicle Safety Center in Warren, Michigan, and is working on multiple aspects of automated driving systems, vehicle electrification, innovative approaches to systems level safety, connectivity and coordinated collaboration across platforms, as well as engaged in a number of related industry and academia consortia. Mr. Mclaine retired from the U.S. Army as an aviation branch lieutenant colonel in 2017. Finally, we have Colonel Hise Gibson, who is an academic professor at West Point, at the military academy there. He also currently serves as a military fellow at the MIT Lincoln Laboratory, and most recently as a visiting scholar at the Harvard Business School. His expertise is the intersection of operational effectiveness and human capital development. So I want to start off this panel by going down the line with our panelists. And again, our framing question for this panel is, in the context of SOF utility, what role does technology play in SOF? So let me go down the line here. I'll go from Hise to Leslie to Joe, and just ask, what's on top of mind for each of you? Hise?
Good morning. First, Mark, thanks for moderating this panel. It's really fantastic to be with a group such as this, and especially Leslie with the work down at SOFWERX and Joe up at GM. And so I think something that's at top of mind for me is that we're in a dynamic environment. And as we've all experienced over the past year with how things like a global pandemic engaging with COVID has actually rapidly increased our behavior with technology. So it's not just our everyday is operating in a Zoom environment, it's also how do we as military professionals who engage globally now are going to leverage technology in order for us to be even more effective to protect our nation. And I think it's not just about the technology, it's also about how are we engaging individuals to leverage technology a little bit differently and maybe take a system thinking approach to engage in austere environments. So similar to how we all know in the SOF environment, not only is it about how do you leverage technology, also can you also use a keyboard, but can you also still make a fire? So very bifurcated realities that are required, and it's going to require SOF to even take a more engaged systems thinking approach in developing those leaders who are required to operate in a dual environment simultaneously. And I'll stop there.
Excellent. Leslie.
Hey, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. And again, like Hise said, great to be in the company of these folks on the panel. So one of the things that's on my mind is, what is the balance for us in terms of discovery of technology, engagement, with those non-traditionals and the folks that we're trying to reach that are creating that new technology. And then, how quickly can we get that technology into the hands of the warfighter? So, our 3 lines of effort are discover, engage, and accelerate. And I think the biggest challenge right now is to accelerate and to ensure that the speed of technology is matched by all of those supporting systems and processes, such as requirements and contracting, so that we can get that technology into the hands of the warfighter before it's obsolete, because it's moving so quickly. And so if we can figure out how to not only modernize, the things that people use on the battlefield at the pointy end of the spear, but also how to modernize and automate those processes that support getting it to the warfighter, I think that's worthy of another look and a lot of focus.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Joe, what are your thoughts this morning?
Good morning, everyone, and greetings from Southeast Michigan. When I left the DoD after a career as a warfighter, and I came to industry, and specifically General Motors, because of their innovative look at technology and the influence that maybe traditional tech companies would look at the future of driving automation, but also things like collaborative technologies to ensure that the deployment of such systems is safe and well conceived. Top of mind for me, really from my vantage point here, is the intersection of technology as well as monitoring technologies within the cockpits, as well as understanding human behavior and how we might influence that to do things that we want, not just in our vehicles, but in the systems that interact with vehicles. And I see a lot of great collaborative emphasis on technology and innovation outside of the DoD that could help influence the way that both the training base is looked at, as well as potential avenues against future adversaries. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And we're definitely going to come back and address some of what you laid out there later on today. So I have a series of questions for the panelists. I've already gone through them, the questions with the panelists. Please feel free to drop your questions or comments into the chat box, and I'll do my best to incorporate those as we go along. Again, I'm going to run down these lists, and we've identified certain questions that our panelists are more comfortable in addressing. So let me start off with the first question here and address it to both Hise and Joe. How do you think emerging technologies will affect SOF's identity? Hise?
And so that's a great question. I think since we all recognize, we'll do a quick history lesson around SOF, the idea that of being individuals who are able to integrate into indigenous environments and help development of others is an overall core identity for SOF. And so when we think in our mental model around special operators, are individuals who are able to be dropped anywhere on the planet and operate in a very effective manner, almost like a MacGyver-like individual who can take a stick, a pole, and a toothpick and create something amazing in order to help indigenous peoples do better in whatever environment they're in. So that's a mental model. But the reality now is that because of technology, that changes the kind of individual required. So it almost really is that MacGyver type person who can possibly engage with an art package on a computer and then also be able to build a raft out of bamboo. And so those are very different environments. And I think that's going to cause a culture in how selection for individuals in SOF may change over time. Because the way in which the organizations are operated has been amazing for decades. But much like everything else, there's going to have to be a rapid cultural adjustment based on technology. So it's not just you have to understand how to code or how to deal with a UAS system or how to call for fire through multiple means based on what's on your hip, like a Batman web belt. It's going to be how do you make better, more informed decisions based on all of the information that's going to be coming into an operator who is deployed globally. And I think that's going to cause a unique change in not only how SOF operates, but also the kind of individuals who are selected in the SOF or the SOF identifies as those folks who are most appropriate to engage in these extremely dynamic and complex operations.
Excellent. Thank you, Hise. Joe, what are your thoughts?
I think that's a great question too. And technology has always been forefront in the mind of the SOF community and the intergovernmental agencies in which it operates. I think the thing for technology that I would want SOF to appreciate is that all of the monitoring, biometrics, facial eye scan technology is becoming very, very commonplace in the market. All you have to do is, go drive a Super Cruise vehicle and understand that the aspects of driver monitoring and attention algorithms to ensure eyes on road, are very much in play. But even more than that, I think the nuances of the defined levels of automation and understanding that in the applications to most benefit the warfighter are an important consideration for technology. The systems that industries outside of the defense realm are integrating, implementing, launching, deploying should seem very, very familiar to the SOF community. Long time pilot or operator monitoring systems, have been implemented, but I think the fact that these are reaching mainstream and commercial products should be something noted by the community. And like I said before in my introduction, the talent pool, the amount of awareness of this and integration of the technology is going to be much, much more familiar to your potential both operators and people that you select, but also the people that you interact with, as well as the people that we become engaged in conflict with. So technology that was once in the realm of special operators is now becoming very, very commonplace in the market. And I think that's an appreciation that should not be understated. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe. All right, Ms. Babich, I have a question for you. What are the challenges with technology for SOF today?
So I think there's several challenges. I think first is, what is the balance of discovering technology and implementing technology in terms of short-term use, that 5-meter target, something we can use right now, and then also looking far forward to maybe that, that 20-meter target. So obviously, we've got guys and girls out on the battlefield now. They come back, they have their after action reports, and there's something that they know they need right now to improve what they're doing today. And then also we need to focus on that, that transformational technology that will just change the way we do business completely and give us a huge asymmetric advantage on the battlefield. So I think that's one of the challenges, is the types of technology that we're looking for. I think another challenge is, again, the speed of technology and advancement and our ability to field it as fast as it's being developed, especially in terms of software development. We used to focus a lot on hardware, but a lot of the things that folks are using today are more focused on software and how do we quickly develop that software to keep up with the pace of technology and what's going on in the world. And then I think another challenge too is, our troops are working, especially in SOF, all over the world. And technology that's appropriate for one theater is not necessarily appropriate for another. And we really want to make sure that, the warfighter has got technology that's appropriate for the environment that they're working in. WhatsApp is maybe a good example. That's an app that's used in certain parts of the world. We don't really use it here in the US. So paying attention to those environmental things and regional things that make that technology applicable to where they're working and suited to their mission exactly where they're at.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Excellent response. So we have no shortage of questions coming into the chat box here. So I wanted to take a look at that. And I'll throw two jump balls out here, one at a time for our panelists. The first question states, we have technical experts and we have policy experts that often talk past each other. How do we develop personnel sufficiently versed on both sides to bridge the gap between tech and policy? Is there anybody on the panel who would like to take a stab at that question?
I'm always ready to take a jump ball when provided.
Okay, go ahead.
And so, as someone who teaches systems engineering at the academy, what you're talking about is almost like the hybrid individual. So someone that we actually develop, and we do a pretty good job in the Department of Defense developing these kinds of individuals. Those who have a level of technical expertise and those who have a hint of policy. And if we think about the requirements of just being an officer, of having a 4-year degree, or we have a lot of senior NCOs who have doctorates, who are just amazing and teammates. And so it requires individuals, and some of it is serendipity, and some of it is very deliberate to develop the kinds of folks who can operate in the middle. And that's what, and having a number of those people who can bridge the gaps is what's required, but it takes experiences. So it almost takes individuals who, at one point in their career, are very technical focused in whatever area they're in. Similar to our functional areas in the Army. So like an operations research analyst, functional area 49. But before that person at 49, he or she is a lieutenant on the ground in a unit. So they have a mental model how the unit operates. So individuals at least in the Army's functional areas are more apt to be the bridge because they've had both, I'll say, muddy boots time, operational experiences, and then deeply rooted technical experiences. So I would give a high five to at least our strategists in the Army who are extremely effective at being the bridge because they're not a single tracked developed individual. They are forced by the nature of the culture of the service to be bifurcated. They have to have both. And those who are more effective leverage both sides of their left and right brains and are able to help senior leaders be even more effective. But similar to what's required for basic system engineers in order to talk technical and then communicate with stakeholders. And I'll stop there.
Great. Did anybody else?
Yeah, Mark, let me add a little bit to what Hise is saying. I think exposure and education and experience are all important to draw from. I don't think that anybody that hasn't spent time in an assignment or been exposed to policymakers or the din of conflicting interests and different collaborative environments would necessarily be the best person to talk in a intersection of both technology and policy. I think exposure and the broadening opportunities that are given, and also those that are taken by the right individuals to broaden their knowledge base and in exposure to that policy world. But certainly the two must come into contact with one another in order to be most effective. Thanks.
Okay, going back to our chat box here. This is a related question, so I wanted to pair it up. And I'll throw out a jump ball. how do we retrain current leaders to maximize the use of technology? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I'd like to take a stab at that one, I think. I think technology adaption is really a mindset. And I think there's a chart out there called the Law of Diffusion of Innovation. And it really focuses on innovators and early adapters. And then you've got the kind of the midterm adapters and the late, and then the ones that will never adapt technology at all. So really, I think you have to get into the psychology of that and figure out where you are on the spectrum and where all the stakeholders are on the spectrum. And, create that win-win. And how do you pull people left, closer to the early adopter stage? I think, maybe a good example is the iPhone. I think most people can relate to that. You had obviously the folks that created it, the one that stood in line, spent the night on the sidewalk the night before to get that first version. The ones that maybe waited for a couple of months to see the reviews and then went and bought it. And then there's some that, waited till iPhone 3 or 4, and then you have my father-in-law who will never buy one. So how do you create the need and the understanding for everybody to kind of pull left on that spectrum to adapt the technology? And I do think it's education and awareness about what's in it for you, how can it benefit you where you're sitting right now, and then how can it benefit, the guys and girls that are out there fighting the fight. So again, I think it's a psychology thing and just understanding that.
Excellent responses, Leslie. Hise, I have a question directed specifically to you. And it kind of goes off those last two questions. Is SOF developing agile leaders who can operate in a tech-heavy environment?
And so I'll approach this semi-gingerly, only because, being as a service, we all believe that we are building the right individuals at the right time. We're all awesome, right? But if we think about it, a special operator is by definition special. So narrowly focused to engage in a very specific thing. So if I want someone to be dropped on the mountain of Afghanistan or embedded in the Balkans, I'm probably going to call someone fill in the group number in order to engage based on their level of expertise of language, culture, and those things. Because they are a special surgical knife that is leveraged as part of a national lever. I would say, unfortunately, I think there may need to be a relook at how SOF is developing a little bit more agile. Because if I'm in whatever group, I think it's 7th group, that may operate in the Middle East, and maybe 10th group or vice versa, that operates down in South America. If I'm operating in South America, I want that group there. But maybe not that same group now sitting in the Middle East or in Europe, because they're a surgical knife, which means they are less agile at other things. Now, are the skills that are developed in very specific areas of the world transferable? Absolutely. But not everything transfers one-to-one, which we've all learned over the past year in the Zoom world. So it requires a re-look at how we're developing people and what are other things that will complement those individuals in order to truly make them more agile in a way that is needed as they become more senior and operate at the enterprise level in Tampa, in DC, Brussels, or fill in the blank major place on the planet where we need their level of expertise to really ensure that our national interests are leveraged.
Fantastic response, Hise. And I'm seeing some more comments and questions coming into the chat box building off of that. So if you'll allow me, I want to throw a jump ball on this question here. As we accelerate, in quotes, and field new technology to our warfighters and additional cyber vectors open, what steps are we taking to harden and secure vectors against our competitors? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Okay. Fair.
Mark, I'll take that real quick. I think,
sure.
There are concerns in industry as well on hardening our systems. The best things that we can do, I'm sure, in place in the DoD as well, but we take those that have taken part in many of the hackathons and ensure that our systems are robust against all potential attacks, but also reducing the number of entry points for vectors. Case in point, the fully automated vehicle that we're looking to launch has been, number of entry points or potential vector access has been intentionally reduced. So I think enterprise level systems can follow the same approach. The interest is definitely minimizing the risk, but in our industry, the automotive industry, we're looking to reduce the number of potential access points. That offers any kind of consideration. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I'd like to stick with you, Joe. I actually have two questions back to back for you. First, what types of technologies do you think SOF should be employing today across the competition continuum?
I certainly welcome that question. Several of the things that GM is working on, and you may know, and other members that are listening in may know, GM Defense was relaunched just a few years ago, and recently won a bid for the infantry squad vehicle, made air-droppable, highly maneuverable mobile platform based on a commercial off-the-shelf, light-duty pickup truck that can be outfitted, in multiple different configurations. The technologies I think SOF would very much benefit from considering, if they aren't already, are the rapid advance in electrification, whether that's battery electric vehicles, battery electric cells, alternate energy fuel cells, and the like, to both complement the quietness and the range and extended operations of such technology, as well as considering all of the aspects of automation. The hardware should not be discounted in the fact that operating autonomously without any human intervention certainly serves a role, and whether that's in logistics, in delivery of resources, whether they're man or material, should all be considered. So again, the automotive industry, I think, is really leading the way in considering both gradations and nuances of the automation of driving technologies, as well as the collaborative interactions there within between the systems we operate on, roads, infrastructure, and the like.
Fantastic. Again, I want to stay with you, Joe, on this, and I think this question really goes off some of the introductory material you provided us with here. And my question is, what other U.S. governmental or non-governmental elements of national power should SOF be thinking about?
I welcome the talk, the opportunity to talk about the U.S. Department of Transportation's recent publication of the AV Comprehensive Plan, spanning 2 different administrations. The recent AV Comprehensive Plan really detailed a whole of government approach that I had not seen outside of interactions within the DoD. The AV Comprehensive Plan builds upon a safe approach to the deployment, consideration, and development of automated driving technologies. I think that working across governmental cabinet developments, the SOF community would be very much interested in understanding the adversaries and potential operational environment considerations for smart transportation systems, and how collaborative technologies might be leveraged and or accessed for our benefit. Other non-governmental considerations for the advancement and integration of technology exist in outside consortia. So, very plainly, standards development organizations such as SAE, ISO, and others, around the world are really potentially ripe for both an understanding and exposure to warfighters within the Department of Defense, and as well as other governmental agencies that wield national power. I think that you're going to see in the next couple years a sharp increase in both the awareness and deployment of automation in technologies that have been mostly human-driven for the past century, as well as a sharp increase in the amount of electrification concerns for traditional modes of transportation. Thank you.
That is fascinating, Joe. And I wonder how the laws and regulations will keep pace with the soon to be unrolling of much more autonomous vehicles. So it'll be an interesting conversation to be had for sure. So Hise, I have a question for you. And this is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. It's something I think about quite often. And my question is tech, emerging tech, leading to a more effective team and operation? What are your thoughts on that?
Yes and no. and the reason why I say yes and no is obviously as we all know, as we introduce technology, the idea behind introducing technology normally is in order to make us more effective, faster, or get something done, or engage in developing routine tasks. That's the idea. But similar to what Leslie highlighted, there may be a very different level of acceptance on the team. So if you have a cross-functional team that's cross-functional in background, in job title, and also in age demographic, there may be a level of non-acceptance that then others have to pick up on. And so overall, is it making us more effective? As we accept it, or as it becomes more of the cultural norm, absolutely we are. However, there's still no replacement for human interaction and talking to someone. I mean, as we think about how we've all adapted to the flat world that we're in, the Zoom fog that we're in at this moment, there's no separation from if we were at a conference, sitting in Tampa, walking outside, having a coffee and having engaged relationships or engaging with team members. There's just a spark that happens when we're all together in that way. And so on its face, absolutely, we are becoming more effective. We're having to be more engaged with the technology. However, we can never forget that we're all people and we need engagement in a personal way. And that is one of the key ways for us, in order to be effective, to develop the trust required to be an effective team, especially when we're in crisis.
Mark, I'd like to add on to that if I could.
Absolutely.
Like I said, I think, technology is a tool, and how we employ that tool is most important, to get the most benefits out of the technology. And, sitting in a room with other folks and brainstorming about how we can use the technology in different applications. You might see commercial applications that with a couple of tweaks could be applied to a government problem. So I think that is really, really important, that discussion that occurs, even here in the room when we see new technology, because we talk to companies all the time. My chief technology officer and I and program managers, we all have some military experience. We have people on the team that don't have military experience. So to talk about it with all of those different perspectives and see how we can apply that tech to a problem, I think is really important and helps with the development of the technology as well.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So now we have a question in the chat box, and Leslie, you kind of addressed this earlier, so I want to throw it back to you, and maybe there's something more you can add. Let me pull up the question here. Let's see. Technology advances faster than Army and soft procurement methods. What are your thoughts on shortening the flash to bang between discovery of an emerging technology and how to get it to operators?
I think we, as a country, need to relook at some of the acquisition processes to see, especially for software development, how we can quicken those processes up to match the speed of technology. And I think that the government is starting to look at that, but it's not fully developed. There are some proposed different ways of doing things, and I think actually our PEO for SDA at SOF AT&L is really taking a look at how to do that with software applications. So again, there's processes in place, but we need to change how we do things, not necessarily what we do, because we really need to make sure we're, taking into consideration taxpayer money and how we spend it and to make sure we're getting that competition. But there are definitely ways to shorten it. And if we can find ways to do things in parallel versus sequentially, I think that will help absolutely.
Great, fantastic response.
And Mark, can I add on to what Leslie just highlighted?
Absolutely.
Some services do a much better job of acquisition than others, just generally and in small ways. So if we and all of us have our warts, so to speak, our programs that are those things. However, for instance, the Air Force, as an example of in some of its software development, has forced open architecture in order to get away from proprietary requirements. If we think about many of us who are seasoned soldiers who operated in the 90s, we remember every widget had its own piece of software separate, and none of them would speak to each other. And as we operated in the Middle East, migration started to occur, just not fast enough. But the Air Force made a bold move not too long ago to force organizations to work together, which brings a lot of intellectual power from our DoD government entity partners, industry partners, to really come up with the best ideas, the best things for the service. And then you can also add on the new thing. So when the new hotness comes out, we're able to bolt that on without huge issues and IP challenges. And I think, I think we've started to learn that in the Army, and a lot of large industry partners are already going to that way. But I think that's a way to hasten and get things out of idea mode, ideation, into someone's hands faster than like a 20-year cycle.
Very good. Next, I have a question for the group. We'll have Joe answer it first, then Leslie, then Hise. The question is, how do we get people to think about technology implementation? Joe, what are your thoughts?
I like what I had said earlier. I think it's exposure. I think the more you can get people exposed to what emerging technologies there might be and get them comfortable with it. Again, things that are both maybe commercially available or exposure in the marketplace. Again, some of those are going to be easier to procure than perhaps others that take lengthy cycles of deliberation and contracts. But I think both exposure and experience handling or dealing with the technology. Again, the automotive industry is facing a revolution in the coming years that I think would be potentially ripe for the SOF and other governmental partners to latch onto or do a parallel path as well. All of the work on automation and automated driving systems certainly has a role in all aspects of perhaps minus the kinetic strike or the direct strike right now. But thank you.
Leslie, what are your thoughts?
So I think first of all, there has to be a need, and clearly, if it's an existential need, that becomes very top priority, and people are really motivated to adapt that technology. But if it's not, and if it's maybe a secondary or third need, I think it has a lot to do with what Joe said in terms of educating people and expanding the aperture of awareness. So a lot of times we'll have folks come in and they say, I want to adopt this piece of equipment because it's going to give me a 5% improvement on my speed. So our job would be to expand their aperture and show them the other technology that's out there that maybe would increase their speed by 10% or 15 or something like that. So just to increase the awareness of what's in the art of the possible and how that could benefit their operations, I think is really important. And then also, I'll be honest with you, considering technology implementation, talk about there are so many improvements in terms of automation in the auto industry and other industries too, but also keep in mind too supply chain and how that could potentially affect technology adaptation and the ability to get those materials made. And this is kind of straying a little bit, but keeping in mind where those resources are throughout the world and who has control of some of those resources. And so keeping an eye on the supply chain in terms of your need might change very quickly if you run out of resources and you have to kind of and shift.
Sure. Leslie, if I can ask a follow-up on that, since you brought up the supply chain, how much should we be worried about kind of the globalization of the supply chain? Should we be trying to focus our supply chain more internally, domestically? Should we be focusing it more on Western countries, our allies? Or, is it good as it is, just with some slight modifications?
I think the pandemic probably highlighted very succinctly resources and global impacts of pandemics or natural disasters. And it's really going to depend on the industry. I worked at Jabil Defense and Aerospace for a couple of years. And when the pandemic kicked off, there were plants that were shut down for government regulations. And you couldn't, get components for, circuit card assemblies to actually make the circuit card assembly. There's a lot of delays in shipping. So the freight capacity was greatly reduced. That's another impact. Again, I think you really do need to take a look at what's out there in terms of resources. I'll be honest with you, I think a lot of defense systems, they're legacy systems, they're built with older technology. You have to look at the folks that are building components that support that technology, because it's not going to be a money-making business for them much longer when they're focused on this small bit of legacy technology and this huge commercial and government opportunity for new technology. And to get those components for the older tech is going to be more difficult. It's going to be more expensive. So we actually do need to modernize our systems, our warfighting systems in government, to actually be able to continue to make them. And that's a business decision for a defense contractor. Do they want to? And I'll just use circuit card assemblies as an example because I'm most familiar with it. Do you want to modernize your circuit card assembly that supports, a certain defense article, knowing that it's going to cost you a little bit of money to redesign it? However, you'll be more assured that those materials are available to build it in the future. So just a consideration for tech.
Great. Yeah, I agree with a lot of that, and I'm sure you and I can have a very interesting discussion on supply chains. In fact, we'll hold an entire conference on the importance of supply chains. Let me get back to the original question and throw it back to Hise. How do we get people to think about technology implementation?
Great question. And just to add to what Leslie highlighted, and I was really excited when you said supply chain, Leslie, just because that's like a thing. And lack of resiliency in the supply chain is kind of you're dead in water. And all of a sudden, I think those who've not thought about the importance of it, all of a sudden realize how important something like that is. And so in order to, the only thing I would add to what's been said about implementation of technology is similar to Leslie's comment around going and getting something that increases 5%. Unfortunately, we've become kind of erratic in saying, I need this new tech, and not thinking about, is my workforce able to consume the new tech? What's the training cycle for the new tech? What's the contract life cycle of said tech? How does the tech integrate with other things? And so normally those who are asking for it have thought about, I want to improve whatever situation, without thinking about the overall integration organizationally around the technology. So it's almost every leaders forcing people to really advocate in a rigorous way why something is necessary and how it's going to improve over time. And once that vetting has occurred, then think through the training required. Because without the appropriate training, implementation, like many things, will not happen. I'm sure many of us have stories of either camping or playing in the woods somewhere with this awesome new gadget that all of a sudden we really have no idea how it works. It was great during the demo and did not work when it met resistance or rain. And so I think the training aspect of the population is the most important part in technology implementation.
Response, Hise, and I would only add to that, sometimes we might need to ask people, okay, we understand that you need this technology. It'll make you 5% better if they're at your job, say. But is there other options that are available that might not be a high technology? Do you need a drone, or will a carrier pigeon suffice for this? You know, so it's also about asking that question. Yeah, this is really cool, but do we need to do it, and are there other options? So our short discussion on the supply chain actually got a question in the box here, in the chat box. So I want to throw it out to the group to see if they might want to take a second bite at the apple for supply chains. And that question is, as the focus shifts to GPC and competitors change resource allocations, how are we going to be able to maintain our technical edge and secure our supply chain? Does anybody want to take a second bite at the supply chain apple?
I would say, you know, pulling the supply chain in as much as possible, so it's, you know, within control of those folks that are building defense material is really important. You know, we can't tell other countries what to do. They can shut down and decide not to, you know, share with us. Partnering with other nations, you know, to kind of secure that supply chain for resources that are not available in the United States. So we do definitely need to have a level of independence and control, not 100%, because we do need to partner. You know, folks rely on us, we rely on them. So building those partnerships, I think, are really important too.
Mark, if I could make one more thing about supply chain. The auto industry, of course, is, you know, very much global and very lean on its supply chain operations. I know this firsthand. The approach the auto industry takes is will be very familiar to those who operate in the DoD. There's been a lot of discussion on sourcing raw material and things domestically, but understanding again that there are some things that are not produced here in the United States. Certainly, we want to protect, the auto industry wants to protect the interest from supply chain disruptions, whether they be weather, man-made, or otherwise. But when you're looking at deploying and supporting the warfighter, I think it's also important to consider technologies that are relatively benign, I'll say that, or easily sourced. Case in point, you know, the infantry squad vehicle, the GM Defense just got, you know, under contract with the U.S. Army, is a very high percentage common with a light duty pickup that, you know, Chevrolet dealers around the world to be able to supply parts for in exigent conditions. And so when you're looking at supply chain, it's not just the development of and manufacturing of, it's also the importance to continually supply and feed the beast.
Absolutely.
And the last thing to add on that is reminding us that almost every person who serves in the military is a mini logistician and has an idea around supply chain. And if, as an example, if we remember in the Wayback Machine, way back in 2010-ish, when certain ports were shut down, we had to completely readjust our supply chain at the drop of a hat to continue pushing supplies into Afghanistan. And amazing service members across the DoD were able to flex on a dime to adapt through multiple countries, multiple spaces and places with multiple infrastructure in order to continue getting supplies in. And so I think to Leslie's point, having a level of control is very important. The reality is that we alone cannot support ourselves. That is impossible. We have to partner, and there are other nations who have been partnering in key resource-rich areas for decades. So they actually have the lead on us in that aspect. And they're able to do that by not just getting the resources, but by partnering in a way that is advantageous to the indigenous populace in those areas. So with infrastructure, partnering, employment, and those things, and I think creating and pushing more individuals with the level of expertise to monitor that supply chain and also think through the level of options. The supply chain is no longer just a logistical thing. It is now a business decision that all major industries are realizing in a very meaningful way.
Very good, very good. We have 3 questions in the chat box I'd like to get to. And just as a reminder to the audience, if you could please submit your questions to us and our moderators will deliver those questions to me. The first question that I'd like to address actually deals with AI. And the question is, what are your thoughts on AI, in particular artificial general intelligence, use in MDMP, the military decision-making process? While SOF's reliance on autonomous tech, in parentheses, it says death through lenses, exasperate ethical/moral drift. That's a jump ball for anyone. It's a very good question.
I think I have just a real quick comment. I think obviously the definition of AI is so broad, and really trying to define that. But I think that AI gives us the advantage in data collection and data to look at. I think for the most part, humans will make those big decisions, but AI enables that collection of data to make maybe more informed decisions. Although, there's been studies where AI actually, if you're looking maybe at technology that looks at x-rays, the machine oftentimes makes better diagnoses or what's going on than the human. So there's a balance. And I think it's obviously going to be how willing are humans thinking that, do humans think that machines can make better decisions? And there's risk there. And what is that level of risk until, you're proven otherwise that the machine is making the better decision?
Mark, if I could add one perspective onto what Leslie said, I think there are thorny questions, certainly around the implementation of automation, artificial intelligence, certainly machine learning and data interpretation and extrapolation aren't new to anybody in this community, but keeping the human in the loop, keeping the decision makers that are carbon-based and not silicon-based certainly is a strong ethical consideration. I have my own perspectives. I certainly think there are roles for full automation. And again, understanding the very important nuances between the levels that are very well defined, and an SAE J document, J3016, has very, very good explanations of the different levels of automated driving systems. But those are thorny questions. I do not shy away from thinking about them. As a company, we are very much involved in transportation and mobility, and not necessarily the application of lethal force. So from my perspective, it's a weighty topic. I think that there are yet policy decisions and guidance to be given. Thank you.
Hise, any thoughts?
The only thing I would add is that on the latter part of that question around MDMP, if we think about the military decision-making process as it relates to AI, MDMP is like blocking and tackling for two-a-days. I played football in college, so I'm around two-a-days and practicing prior to a season. And so that's what MDMP provides. It provides a framework that everyone can understand in a very rigorous way how we make decisions. So now if we think about going to a game, when we throw in and use AI as in the game, AI is like an audible. It provides, so I have a base play, I have a way in which I operate, I know how to do things. You know what, but I got this AI audible, or we'll call it like, Oklahoma or Tampa or whatever call was made by Peyton Manning many years ago, Omaha. We'll call Omaha and use AI to help us make a decision faster. But we only leverage the Omaha because we've done all the practice, we've gone through all the steps, we understand all the fundamentals so that we know when to audible. Every opportunity is not an opportunity to audible. So as we integrate AI, it's going to require leaders who have gone through all the rigorous, almost stubby pencil, no calculator struggles in a room with a whiteboard, and then move to the keyboard, and then move to the AI Alexa-like system to help us make better decisions. So it's a progression. Now we must recognize that the future special operators will have been operating as digital natives far longer than many of us who are on this call right now. So their ability to adapt will be faster, but that does not negate the requirement to do the blocking and tackling in order to leverage the new technology more efficiently based on the responsibility that is thrusted upon those who operate on steer environments as national assets.
Great. So I want to ask kind of a weightier follow-on question to this, and feel free to respond or not. And that question deals with the ethical and moral drift and the death through lenses. You know, as we are fighting more, as we're engaging in kinetic operations more through drone strikes, through perhaps autonomous weapon systems that may or may not have a human in the loop. I know we're not there yet. Do we lose something? Are we more willing to engage in conflict, to go to war? I think about the book and then not the good movie, Ender's Game, where it's much easier to take a life, right? Because you're not there, and you're more willing to engage in risk because you're not there. But that also makes you more prone to engage in conflict because you're not really putting as much skin in the game. And then I also think about a book I recently read, Anti-Fragile by Nassim Taleb, who said, you know, policymakers and politicians, and I'm this is not an exact quote, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, you know, they should go and put themselves in harm's way, or put their child in harm's way before they go and vote for the military to engage in a conflict. So I guess the question is, does technology make us have less of a skin in the game and perhaps cause us to value human life less? Weighty question, I know. What are your thoughts? And feel free to jump in if you have thoughts.
Yes.
Okay.
And so I'll come at it from a psychology lens. So if we're honest with ourselves, I'll use like combat is like badness. I'll use the term badness. So proximity to badness causes a heightened sense of understanding, which means when you're further from badness, your ability to operate, you're less anxious. We're all anxious when we're operating, we've all operated with a threat in front of us. But for instance, my partners who are on the ground, the special operations teams that I pick up in a helicopter, or their anxiety is far different than mine in a helicopter to pick them up, because I'm going to pick them up, drop them off, and go back to the airfield that relatively to being on a mountaintop or in a desert is relatively safe. Still dangerous because of mortars and those other things, but the proximity is different. So it's just different. It's not bad or worse. It's just different. And so if we go an extreme, if I'm dropping ordnance and I'm sitting at Nellis, that's a very different thing. That's a very different thing, because unlike those of us who have operated in random tents or non-tents or FOBs or austere environments, when that engagement occurs or happens, you go back to the tent and you're able to commiserate with others who've just gone through the same thing. If you're sitting at Nellis or any other random bunker as a drone operator, for instance, I'll use that, you're going home. Your ability to compartmentalize that what just occurred it's very different. And having talked to a number of colleagues who have operated in that space, that's a very different mindset because your ability to separate things is very different. And you do become, there is a reality that we know that you become almost numb to the actions similar to a video game because you're doing your job, but the same kind of reality that maybe the same person flying overhead has is very different than the drone operator. And so it does make us more numb. It does make us less engaged, and it causes us to think, oh, it's not a big deal. Now, if we're honest, at certain levels, you have to assume risks. When you operate and make these kind of decisions, you recognize a percentage of people will not come home. That's part of the gig. We all understand that. And those are part of the numbers. But I do agree with the idea that those who make those kind of decisions would benefit from having some direct connection to those who may have to walk the ground or execute the orders that are served. Because as we know through history, if we think about the civilian-led government in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, or even 80s, there were far more folks who had served at a 1 degree separation than today. It's just a fact. It's just the way it is. But there is something to having that 1 degree connection that maybe causes a little bit of pause, because those of us who have worn the uniform are far less excited or geeked about going into conflict because we've already thought through the second and third order effects, just in a different way based on experience.
Great.
I think if I could piggyback real quick, I mean, I think social media is a good example where proximity, if you're not as close to somebody, clearly you're more apt to make negative statements, I think, in some cases. On the flip side, for technology and, standoff warfare, I guess on a positive note, the technology allows us to be a lot more precise in terms of where we're applying the effects. So that in itself is a good thing. And obviously the ROE to employ those things should be in place to, prevent that kind of that standoff warfare mindset where, you're not face to face with the folks that you're going to impact potentially in a negative way.
Thanks, Mark. One last thing from my perspective. Yes, removal and the application of technology does allow people to apply death through lenses, but it doesn't have to with heightened engagement, awareness, and again, exposure, education. Heightened awareness of the human factor in warfare, I think, should not be lost on this community at all. Thank you.
Great. Absolutely. Okay, we have a couple questions in the chat box here. So let me see if Leslie has any thoughts on this first. She brought up commercial off-the-shelf products earlier. The question is, how do we balance the risk of potentially exploited COTS, commercial off-the-shelf products, with the benefit of their use? Leslie, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think, again, that probably goes back to supply chain and verifying where all the components to make that COTS came from. To make sure it's secure in the first place. I think, you can't control all of that. I think, leveraging other industries and what they have done to ensure that their products are secure or, how to harden them after you have put them into use. Back to the cybersecurity question, there's other industries, I would say in particular finance, that have been tackling and wrestling with this problem for a really long time. So to be able to leverage what they're doing and how they're using COTS and trying to harden all of those things, I think would be really important. And looking at other countries and see how they do it, right? Because I think we have a lot of options for made in the USA products, probably more so than other countries, but other countries don't. So how do they deal with that? How do they ensure that what they're buying off the shelf is hardened or could be hardened?
Very good. Very good. Okay, we have, let's see, several questions rolling in now. And this question is from my colleague, Lydia Christopoulos, and this question is specifically for Leslie. So Leslie, I'm going to keep you on the hot seat here for a minute more. And the question is, could the government perhaps tell industry that they want 3D files to be able to print parts moving forward?
Absolutely. I think additive manufacturing is a great way forward, to support logistics for some platforms, to build things that, are more efficiently built and effectively built using additive versus, maybe machining, et cetera, in terms of cost savings. So yeah, I do think that we could say, hey, here's what we would like to have built. Here's a 3D print, go for it. There's no reason not to. We have a foundry here that does additive manufacturing for mostly just polymers. But if we can build the 3D image, we can print it here, and you can use it for rapid prototyping, which I think is a great thing as well.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm gonna let you step down off the hot seat now and see if Hise or Joe have any thoughts on this. I'm not sure you do, but I'll throw it out there and we'll see what happens. The question is, how is SOF using emerging tech to develop its talent, i.e. AI-enabled upskilling, reskilling, screening, skills assessment, etc.? Do either of you gentlemen have thoughts on that or have any insights there?
No real insights, but something to add. And only because of colleagues who are operating in SOF and talent management. I mean, I think, especially based off what the Army's Talent Management Task Force is doing, there's a lot of connections between how SOF is operated and through development of individuals over time, and how the Army is broadly trying to do the exact same thing at scale. And so there's a lot of things that a niche community can do because of less than 40,000 people versus 500,000. So it's a little bit different. And so I think, especially based on talking to colleagues who operate in SOF, in the SOF world, they are getting those things. Now, specifically AI, not for certain, but specifically having broadened experiences and pushing out operators to be exposed is happening a lot more frequently than before. For instance, multiple colleagues who are recent team leaders are now at Georgetown or at Johns Hopkins or at Texas A&M, being a little bit more exposed, or at Naval Postgraduate School. And so there's a lot of things that are just educationally and mental gymnastics that are making it better SOF individuals than just a technology integration. I think that's happening more in training, but again, can't speak formally about specifically AI in the training regiment of the SOF community.
I've got nothing specific to add, Mark. I will just say, tag along with Hise, that the talent acquisition considerations and the broadening opportunities that people are exposed to should not underestimate the impact of training with industry. Another opportunity for people, in addition to academic work and both the elbow rubbing and the exposure to people who think differently, the opportunity to train with industry and see how things are done as potentially interns or broadening assignments and opportunities. Again, I think I can't speak specifically to the application of AI in talent management or talent development, but the more you can expose or ask people what their exposure and understanding of different technologies that may be emerging or that they might come from might be good questions to ask.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're going to have more and more of these digital natives moving into the positions of leadership. So it's good to know where they're coming from, what they know, and maybe they can share that knowledge with others around them. So we had a question here earlier on in the chat box here that I want to come back to. I was hoping to find a more natural place to insert it, but it didn't happen. Right, so the question is, social media use of the current generation will impact their ability to operate clandestinely in the future. How do we raise a generation of tech-savvy leaders that can hide in the data? That is the million-dollar question, right? All of this tech that we are employing with our operators is giving off signatures. It's making the noisy easier to pick up. How do we both enable them to be tech savvy, but also hide in the data? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
You can't. It's not going to happen. So, I mean, good one. There's nowhere to hide. We all have footprints, imprints, breadcrumb trails. We all know where each other is right now. At least Google does. So you can't. So since that is our known, it's going to require soft and others in the DoD environment, or anyone who's trying to operate in a clandestine environment, to figure out how to operate when you know that if I really want to find you, I'm like 3 clicks away. So I think it's turned that on its head. You can't, Pandora's out of the box. You can't go back. So since we know this is how the world is, we have to operate how the world is, not how we would like it to be. So, which almost means that probably, and again, no one trains individuals who are already amazing than like the Q course or any of our special operations entities that exist across JSOC and SOCOM. So I think training people on how best to hide themselves or limit their exposure will happen in their 20s after they've already done many TikToks, Snapchats, Instagram posts, talked to parents on Facebook. So it's just going to be an adjustment. It'll be like watching The Wire if you know that old series around Baltimore using burner phones. So it'll be very different. So they'll just have to learn how to figure that out. But it'll take the enterprise to think through how to educate and adapt people to operate in a digital environment, because they are connected. You can't get away from it.
Absolutely. Okay, I have at least one more question here, and I think this one's probably going to be closest to Leslie having insight on this, and if not, that's okay too. The question is, are we looking at potentially leveraging exoskeleton-like technology paired with AI to enhance soft lethality and mobility?
So I think for exoskeleton technology, which kind of goes back to the TALIS program, actually a lot of that exoskeleton technology is being leveraged in the automotive industry. And we're actually hoping that the development of that technology in the automotive industry would circle back around and then have utility for SOF. Beyond the exoskeleton piece, I mean, there was a lot of spin-offs technology, which is now kind of going to that human hyper-enabled operator and all of those things that spun off of the TALIS program. So I don't know that I can speak more to the exoskeleton other than it's now being developed on the commercial side, which is great because they typically have a lot more resources for R&D. And then, you know, we can take a look at it and adapt it back to what the SOF operator needs.
Thank you, Leslie. Yeah, I also thought that question was along the TALIS lines. I did not know that they had spun off. I knew they spun off parts of that program. I did not know it went to the automotive industry. So that's interesting. Joe, do you know anything about that? If not, that's okay.
I do. It's a great corollary. I think when you think about an operator or somebody working in this community looking to leverage some sort of exoskeleton or hyper-enabled strength or capabilities, you don't need to go much further than here in Southeast Michigan and take a look at some of our manufacturing plants. And like Leslie had said, certainly those technologies and early adoption of robotic assistance, moving heavy engines or battery packs or things, you don't have to go very far to see the benefits to enabling human operators in the manufacturing world of the auto industry and learn some insights and gain feedback on how it feels, how much they might be able to operate with, or some of the exigencies behind those closed environments. But it certainly is in practice. The automotive industry, as it looks to increase production, increase the bottom line, as it were, is certainly automating lots of routine and dangerous tasks to include exoskeletons.
Interesting. That's really fascinating.
I think to piggyback on that too, the original intent of the exoskeleton and Telos was, that door kicker, the first guy in, to prevent, obviously catastrophic injury. I think now though, some of that spin-off technology is the sense through the walls and actually being able to see either through vibration or heat signature or RF signature what is on the other side of those walls so that the teams are better prepared to go in. So that maybe now that exoskeleton concept, the Telos concept, isn't required to do that. So that I think that's another great spinoff and thing we learned based on that program.
Thank you, Leslie. Okay, so we are right at the end of our panel for this morning. It was scheduled to go till 10:15, and we are at 10:15. I'd like to sincerely thank each of the panelists today. They exceeded my expectations by far. I learned quite a bit about soft ethics and how that's impacted by technology, about the JSOU and some of the spin-off applications to it. So a really excellent panel from each of the panelists, to include Colonel Hise Gibson, Ms. Leslie Babich, Mr. Joe Mclaine. I'd like to thank them for their time today, and hopefully we can have them back again in the future. But thank you, each of you. So again, we are at the break point now. It's 10:15, and it's going to go until 10:25. When we come back, the next panel is topic 3, session 2, and that's led by Dr. Bill Nahr. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you again, Greg and team. Hi, Leslie and Joe. That was fantastic. And your comments will directly influence the way that SOF envisions its role in our technological future. And Greg was right. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll return with the next panel on the SOF identity lens, exploring SOF's relationship with technology.